What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another hybrid Nightblade build video. It's going to be the updated version of the build I put out about a year ago. We're running some different sets, some different abilities, and I've been getting asked a lot lately what I've been using, so I figured it's about time to get into it. So let's start right off with the sets. So we are running Kynmarcher's Cruelty, Rallying Cry, Balorg, and the Lefthander's Aegis. That's going to be a Kynmarcher's One-Handed Axe, Absorb Stamina Enchant Nirnhoned. Another One-Handed Axe, Shock Enchant Sharpened. This enchant can be whatever you want it to be. I just like having the shock there to make sure I always have vulnerability up when I go for bursts. Rallying Cry, Ice Staff, Defending, Weapon Damage Glyph. You want the Weapon Damage Glyph back bar. So when you do a light attack Elisus on your back bar, you get the benefit of the status effects and that Weapon Damage Glyph. Got Medium Balorg, Head and Shoulders, both impenetrable. The two pieces of Impen plus Rallying Cry plus your base critical resistance brings you just up to around 32 something crit resist, and that is approximately 50% crit damage mitigation. Everybody in the game has at least 50% crit damage unless they're using Malakath. So this is, you're not going to lose any value running these two pieces of Impen here. That's what I like to use. Got the heavy reinforced trainee chest. Everyone knows what this is by now. It's just a line of health. You want it to be heavy and reinforced for the min-max resistances. Got well-fitted Rallying Cry gloves. This is our one piece of light armor. Usually this would be on the belt, but we're using Aegis, so we can't put it on the belt. The gloves are the next lightest piece of armor, the next lowest armor value, so we've got the light piece there. Got the Lefthander's Aegis belt, also well-fitted. This is basically, it replaces your roll dodge with a damage shield. So you can get hit during roll dodge by things that you normally could dodge when you're running this. But this huge damage shield is going to mitigate dot damage and status effect damage and stuff like that. It's extremely valuable in the current meta, and I don't think that you can replace it on this class. I've tried Death Dealers, I've tried Markin, I even tried a no-cloak build using Thracians. I tried Serpent Coil with 3 Swift, and ultimately this is the mythic that I felt benefited me the most when outnumbered. So I've got that here. It's well fitted. Got the Kynmarcher's Greaves. These are also well fitted. Kynmarcher's Boots, well fitted. Got the Amulet, Kynmarcher's Infused. This is a prismatic recovery glyph on this. I know that the combat metrics doesn't accurately reflect what the 3 glyphs are on the jewelry here, but this is a prismatic recovery glyph. Then we've got the 2 Rallying Cry rings, both Swift, and these are both weapon damage glyphs with the stamina recovery. You could go the mag recovery if you wanted. It doesn't really make a difference. It's only 20, maybe 30 scaled regen. Looking at the CP up here, in blue we've got Fighting Finesse, Focused Mending, Duelist Rebuff, and Master at Arms. Down in red we've got Survival Instincts, Sustained by Suffering, Relentlessness, and Pain's Refuge. There is a little bit of flexibility here. You don't have to run Relentlessness. You can drop this for a couple different things. So you could go Rejuvenation here, and then drop this Infused Recovery Glyph and run a Weapon Damage Glyph there, and whatever jewelry trait you wanted. Personally, I felt like the extra 40 or 50 regen this gave me over Rejuve was important, because this build is relatively low sustain. So I decided not to run Rejuvenation here. There is another option that you could do here. You could run Celerity in this slot. And if you're running Celerity, you could then drop these 2 Swift and go for a 2 Bloodthirsty or 2 Infused. I do like Relentlessness. I feel like there are a lot of times you get stunned these days, and either because of performance or whatever, you can't break free that quickly. Relentlessness gives you the 10% mitigation for 3 seconds when you get stunned, not when you break free. And I really felt like this was helping me survive in a lot of situations where I might not have otherwise. This is personally what I found the most valuable. But again, you can consider those other options that I mentioned there. On to the skills. Front bar, we've got Incap as the ult. You can slot Soul Tether if you'd prefer. Soul Tether is pretty good. But the problem with running Soul Tether is a lot of people are really, really tanky these days. It can be really hard to kill certain people if you don't have the modifier from Incap to help you out. So I like running in cap, but it's going to be up to you. Soul Tether is really nice when you're fighting groups of squishy or bad players to get them all off you and, to do good AoE pressure. Merciless Resolve. This is the bow. You want the Magmorph here. Concealed Weapon. This is the spammable. Gives us Major Berserk and also Expedition. We're on our front bar. Got Shadowy Disguise. This is something that you didn't see in my last build. We are now running Invis Cloak. They've buffed the skill. It's basically too good not to run now. It gives you crit on both bars just for being slotted. 10% crit, Major Prophecy, and Savagery. It's pretty much too good to not use. It's unfortunate, but that's kind of the reality. If you were to put Camo Hunter here, you're losing 10% crit on your back bar, which is a ton of healing. So I personally don't think you can really drop this. Dropping this also makes you lose 300 weapon damage from the Vampire passive, so it's just pretty much too good to drop. This is also an easy way to proc Concealed Weapon. You can proc Concealed Weapon, as you can see in the tooltip, either by casting it while Expedition from Path is active, or by leaving Cloak. So I'll go over this a bit more later, but oftentimes I'll just bash weave a Shadowy Disguise to instantly leave Cloak on my front bar and to proc Concealed Weapon and Vampire passive. So it's a good interaction there, and it's just another reason to have this on your bar. Power Extraction, this is our Major Brutality buff. Everybody knows what this does by now. It's also an AoE. You can use it to catch people that are rolling, to pull Nightblades out of stealth, to do AoE damage, that sort of thing. Killer's Blade, Execute, pretty valuable. Everybody's extremely tanky, especially when they get to low health with Undeath, so Killer's Blade's really important. Back bar, Ice Staff, you've got Undo, this is the ult. You want this back there for the mitigation. If you wanted to, you could put Soul Tether on your front bar, and then put Incap or the other morph of Incap, Soul Harvest, on your back bar. That is an option, but you are going to lose the 5% mitigation. I prefer Undo. I feel like the mitigation's pretty valuable. Elemental Susceptibility. This is our Major Pen debuff. You can actually proc the Major Pen with Kynmarchers, but it's not consistent enough to rely on. So I slot Susceptibility. Susceptibility is also going to give us access to a few status effects that are going to really increase our damage. So Susceptibility is on the back bar. If you do like a light attack Susceptibility, you get the status effects and you get the benefit of this weapon damage glyph, so it's really good to have it there. Healthy Offering, Burst Heal. Everyone knows what this does. Refreshing Path, Major Expedition, Minor Recoveries, and an AoE heal over time. I like to put this down in any area I'm going to try to turn and hit people that are chasing me in. I like to stand in this pretty much all the time when I'm 1v1ing, and I use this as my mobility skill as I'm line of sighting and kiting around, so really strong skill. This is also going to make it easier to proc Concealed Weapon, because while the Expedition from this is up, if you cast Concealed Weapon, you're going to proc the Major Berserk, so really useful skill. Resolving Vigor. It's minor resolve and heal over time. Staple. Can't really drop that. Phantasmal Escape. This is our Snare Immunity. We cast this when we're line of sighting. It's also our Major Evasion, so we need to keep it up all of the time. The 20-second Major Evasion buff there. It's a ton of mitigation. It's pretty much invaluable. This also gives us a ton of Stam Sustain from the roll cost reduction that you can see in the third part of the tooltip there. You can't drop this. It's pretty much too good to drop. You could try running Shade here instead if you wanted to play a build that relies on Shade. Definitely an option. But my personal opinion, I feel that this is too valuable to drop. So another thing you could do is you could put Race Against Time here, and then that would allow you to just flex this out for whatever you wanted to put in that slot. I did test that a little bit. Race Against Time and Shade, and ultimately I just prefer this. It's probably a playstyle preference for me from having played like this for the past year or so. Go on to the race, the Mundus Food and whatnot. We are a Khajiit. Been a Khajiit for quite a while now. I don't think I'm going to change. I just like the crit damage and healing it gives me. We've got the Thief Mundus. This is something that I've swapped up. I sit at about 108% critical damage. And I feel that the Thief, the crit chance from the Thief gives me way more survivability because of the healing on my back bar, the crit healing. I also feel like it gives me more consistent burst on the front bar because I'm not relying on, a lower crit chance for those big crits from running like the Shadow Mundus. You could do the Shadow if you want to. You could do the Warrior, I guess. For me personally, I tested the Shadow and the Thief extensively, and this is what I prefer. So we are Vampire Stage 3, obviously. Every single PvP build should be a Vampire Stage 3. There's no reason whatsoever to not run this. It is a mandatory staple. If you aren't running it, you're taking a fat L, so run this. Bear Haunch. This is max health, both recoveries. Pretty much everyone knows what this is. It's pretty expensive these days. If you can't afford the Bear Haunch, run the Jewels of Misrule. It's a purple food. It's the Bear Haunch with slightly less stats, but it's dirt cheap. So if you can't afford the Haunch, just run the Jewels of Misrule there, and that'll be totally fine for you. You want the Corrupting and the Purifying Maras on you at all times. You use these to reset your Vamp stage, so whenever you drop below stage 3, you drink a Corrupting, you drink a Purifying, and then you put your food back up. And then on to the potions. I'm running Tripots pretty much all the time. It's both sustains. The build doesn't run a ton of sustains, so this is important to have both regens here. And I like to keep these slotted too. These are immovable stealth detection potions. These are really good for Nightblades. You can run the mag ones if you want. I prefer the Stam ones. The Stam sustain is more valuable to me when I'm hunting down Nightblades, so I like to keep these slotted, but basically I'll be using these all the time. Okay, so I wanted to spend a little time talking about a couple of the sets. I'm not going to go over the combat mechanics as much as I did in my previous video. I will link the previous video down in the description, though. Pretty much all of the offensive burst stuff I talked about in that video is still relevant today. Nothing's really changed on that front. I know a lot of people enjoyed that. If you haven't seen it, I recommend checking it out if you're trying to learn how to play Nightblade. And again, that'll be linked down in the description. But I do want to talk about the sets, starting with Kynmarchers. So Kynmarchers, what this does is when you deal direct damage, you apply 1 of 5 random major debuffs to enemies within 8 meters of you for 18 seconds. This can occur once every 8 seconds. And only if an enemy is in range. So this won't proc unless it can hit someone, which is really nice. You don't have to worry about like weaving on your back bar and then swapping front while at a range and having it go off. It's only going to go off if they're in range. And because of the cooldown, you could technically have 3 effects on somebody at once, but realistically 2. And the eligible buffs are Major Breach, Major Cowardice, Major Defile, Major Maim, and Major Vulnerability. So Major Breach we already get from Elemental Susceptibility, although it can be nice sometimes when this applies it in an AoE to everybody. But we run this for the other buffs. So Major Cowardice, that reduces your opponent's weapon and spell damage by like 450 or something like that. And we actually get Minor Cowardice from Power Extraction. So when you Power Extract a group, if Major Cowardice goes off, you can be reducing their weapon and spell damage by something like 700 or 800. And that is a huge damage loss for everybody. You can also proc Major Maim on people, which reduces their damage done by 10%. Those two things will reduce people's damage by a lot. It is really going to help you reduce the damage that you're taking while outnumbered by keeping this proccing. You can proc Major Defile, which reduces their healing by 10%. You can also get the Minor Defile off of, I believe, Incap and Power Extraction. I think they're both disease damage, so if you proc the status effect, you can actually get both Major and Minor. This also helps when you're going offensive on people to reduce their healing a little bit. It's not hugely relevant, but it's definitely nice to have. But the big one for offense is Major Vulnerability. Major Vulnerability is a true 10% damage modifier. It is damage taken, meaning that it's the last thing applied in the damage calculation. And if you proc this on people, you are going to hit them a true 10% harder. That is a lot of damage. That is pretty much on par with all of the highest damaging sets in the game. Now, it isn't extremely consistent. Obviously, this is RNG. You might proc it, you might not. But we do a couple things to make it a little bit easier to rely on. And basically what those two things are is we're going to track the cooldown of Kynmarchers, and we track the Major Vulnerability. This is on PC. If you're on console, you can still do this using the console UI. However, it's a little bit harder to see. As for the Kynmarchers cooldown, I'm not sure that you can track the cooldown of Kynmarchers on console. I don't think there's a way to do that. But you can track the Major Vulnerability by looking at enemy debuffs. So definitely worth keeping an eye out. But I use Srendar to track the cooldown and the Major Vulnerability. And essentially what that is you can see right here, we've got the Kynmarcher's cooldown here. And that counts down from the time until I can apply it again. So each time I proc it, you can see it counting down there in the bottom. And that allows me to keep this up as much as possible. You want to proc Kynmarchers on cooldown all the time. And if you look right here, we've got the Major Vulnerability tracker. I put this right next to my reticle, so basically when I proc this on people, I can see that it's procced, and I know right away to go aggressive on people. So doing those two things are definitely worth it if you're on PC. It's going to make it a lot easier to use the damage component of Kynmarchers, and also a lot easier to keep the debuff up as much as possible. Those are both important things to do. You get a lot of value out of Kynmarchers when you keep it proccing as soon as it runs out. And by tracking that major vulnerability, you're going to have way better opportunities to go offensive. With this set, if you're fighting like a tanky player, since we're running this in Balorg, you can just wait. You can just wait until you see the major vulnerability proc and stack up your Balorg, and then once you see it, you can try to burst them then. It's really important these days because a lot of people are just flat-out tanks, like complete and total tanks, so it's really nice to be able to see when that procs. And stacking the Balorg just kind of synergizes nicely with waiting for that proc. Alright, so we're also going to talk about the Lefthander's Aegis Belt. This is a new item that I'm running on this build. Most people have probably seen this by now. It's been out for quite a while. I think this is really valuable these days because I find that a lot of the damage that gets you killed outnumbered is status effect dot damage, you know, proc dot damage, flat out dots from things like Master's Dual Wield. And you can't mitigate that damage. There's no way to mitigate that damage, really. When you're rolling around and you don't have this belt on, spamming your heals, those dots and status effects are just ticking you down, and they're making your heals less valuable because, you know, you're taking damage while you're trying to heal back up. This belt makes it so that when you do those dodge rolls, you're also mitigating the dot damage and the status effect damage. It's not going to take you down while you're rolling around. So, like, by weaving your burst heal in between rolls and keeping the shield up and whatnot, you're really, it's going to be a lot easier for you to recover and reset your buffs and go back offensive again. It's a huge shield. It's so large that there are going to be very few scenarios where you actually get that shield broken. It's something like 20k, so realistically, unless you're being zerged down, that's never going to get broken. And if it does get broken, you were probably going to die anyways because you were taking so much damage. So I'd say it's probably the best in slot 1vx mythic for this class and any other class that relies on rolling more than blocking and healing or shielding. There are a few things you can do with it too. For example, you can use it to eat things like ults, certain things like Meteor. Before, typically you would block a Meteor. However, if the person using it on you has like a hard CC to combo it with, your block might be kind of worthless. Like, for example, a ranged Templar, if they use a Meteor and then they javelin you, it doesn't matter if you're blocking, you're going to get knocked back and then stunned, or knocked back and then take the full damage from the Meteor. However, like, let's say you have a Meteor on you, instead of blocking it, you can just roll. And that you'll get stunned in the middle of the roll by the Meteor, but the shield is going to completely eat the Meteor damage and any other damage you might have taken in that couple of seconds. So situations like that, the Mythic really, really shines. You can use it, when you're getting zerged down and you're running away, it's really nice to just be mitigating all that damage and to, allowing your burst heal to be more effective. And you can actually take really, really good advantage of this Mythic on this class because of the fact that you get the roll cost reduction from Phantasmal Escape, and we're running the 4 well-fitted, the 3 pieces of medium. So you can really roll quite a bit. When you're low on mag, you can use the roll as a pseudo burst heal, to kind of wait a second for your mag to come back so you can cast another burst heal, that sort of thing. Again, overall, I felt like this was the best possible Mythic for Outnumbered in this patch. You can try other stuff if you want. I mentioned at the start of the video a few other Mythics that I had tested, but I think once you get used to how this Mythic works, you're going to find that this is the best option. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about a couple of new mechanics that sort of differ from the last build. Again, I do recommend that you check out the last build if you're looking for combat, survivability, offense mechanics on Nightblade, if you're trying to learn the class, because that build video has quite a bit of valuable information that is still completely relevant. Again, I'll link that down in the description if you're interested. But there are a couple of different mechanics with the new skills we're running now that you need to take advantage if you're going to play this build. So the new things that we're running are Elemental Susceptibility on our back bar and Cloak on our front bar. That's pretty much the only thing different from the build previously. So let's talk about susceptibility. When you apply this, you get a bunch of debuffs you can see up here. And those debuffs are Burning, which is a dot, Minor Brittle and Minor Maim, which is 10% crit damage taken and 5% reduced damage. You get Minor Vulnerability, which is 5% damage taken. So when this is on somebody with the status effects up, you're going to hit them harder, and you're also dealing a little passive damage with Burning. And we also have this glyph, this weapon damage glyph down here, this Berserker glyph on our back bar. So one thing that you want to take advantage of in comparison to the last build is doing a light attack susceptibility before you go for a burst, or even during your burst. So what that would look like is if I do a light attack sus, I have the glyph up and I have the status effects up, which is just going to be a lot of damage. That is a significant amount of damage. And you can do that at any point during your burst combo. You always want to start by having the sus on them, but like, let's say, you do a couple of things, you set them off balance. You could then do a light attack sus in cap and then like a medium execute or something like that. And doing that before you go in for that burst or somewhere in the middle of that is just going to increase the damage that those last few things do by quite a bit. So it's worth always going for that. If you know they're going to dodge roll too, you can go for a susceptibility, because if they're in a dodge roll, susceptibility is still going to hit them. So if you know they're going to roll, rather than just like missing a concealed weapon or missing an execute or missing a bow on them, you could just go to your back bar and hit them with the sus while they're in the roll. And then when they come out of it, you can continue doing whatever you're going to do, and you're going to be hitting that much harder because you went for the sus and you got the minor vulnerability and the minor brittle on them. Now, the other thing we're going to talk about is cloak. We have Invis Cloak on the build now. I don't really use this defensively very much. You can try to use it if you're getting zerged down, but the truth about Invis Cloak is that it works really well when it's an XV1 scenario, when you're zerging someone down, or when you're not getting hit by a bunch of people. Invis Cloak doesn't break that much. When you are outnumbered and you have dots on you, susceptibilities on you, Invis Cloak just breaks constantly. It almost doesn't work at all. Every time a susceptibility applies status effects to you, it breaks Invis Cloak. If someone puts an entropy on you, every dot at tick of the entropy will break Invis Cloak. So it's just really not great these days as an outnumbered survival skill. But as an offensive skill, it is pretty good. Because when we exit Cloak, we proc this Strike from the Shadows passive. This is a vampire passive, and this gives us 300 weapon damage, which after scaling is closer to 400 weapon damage. What this also does is when we exit Cloak on our front bar, we also get Major Berserk from Concealed Weapon. You can also get this by just casting a Concealed Weapon while you have Expedition up from Path. That also procs it. But proccing it by activating Cloak and getting that Strike from the Shadows passive is really nice before you go in for a burst. So, I'd like light attack sus sometimes, and I might just go Cloak and then just immediately keep hitting them, not even worrying about what I'm doing while invisible. And sometimes, since people like to roll dodge when you go invisible, sometimes what I'll do is I will bash weave the Cloak, and I will exit it instantly. And on their screen, they might not even see me turn invisible, but I still get my damage passives from using it. So that's just something I like to do. It's up to you how you use Cloak, but I just want to kind of specify that it is not that good of a defensive tool when you're outnumbered these days, but it does work really well offensively. So just bear that in mind. That's just one thing I wanted to go over since it's sort of different from the last build that I ran. That's going to be it for this build video. I appreciate everybody checking it out. I hope you enjoy the build if you give it a try. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, drop them down in the comments section. I'll be happy to get back to you. If you enjoyed it, drop a like and a sub. Helps me out quite a bit. I'm not sure when I'll be streaming going forward just because the state of the game is pretty rough right now. The balance is really bad and there's been no PvP content in about 5 years. But if we happen to see something positive in the January global reveal that should be upcoming, maybe you'll see me go live and talk about it then. All right, again, appreciate you all tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Take care.